I never thought I'd be the type of guy to follow his wife. It felt beneath me, something you'd see in cheap TV dramas. But here I was, sitting a few rows behind Emily in a theater I had no interest in, watching her lean in close to a man I didn't recognize. Her hand was on his arm, and they were whispering to each other, completely unaware of my presence. I had thought about confronting her before, asking her straight up if there was someone else. But every time I considered it, I brushed the thought away. We were married and I trusted her. Or at least I had. Tonight was supposed to be different. She told me she was going out with friends, that it was just a girls' night, something casual. The way she said it, so effortlessly, like she had nothing to hide, made me sick. Something had felt off between us for months, and I knew deep down that she wasn't telling me the full story. The late nights, the work trips, and the distant looks she gave me when we were alone. It all started adding up. I tried to ignore it at first, to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But now, as I watched her laugh with another man, I knew the truth. My heart pounded in my chest, anger bubbling under the surface. I was torn between marching down there and tearing them apart or waiting for the perfect moment. The latter won out. I wasn't just going to make a scene. I wanted to see the truth laid bare. I wanted her to realize how caught she was, to see her world collapse the way she was slowly destroying mine. The theater lights dimmed, signaling the start of the show, but I couldn't focus on anything happening on stage. My eyes were locked on Emily and the stranger beside her. The way she was sitting, slightly leaning into him, her body language giving her away. She wasn't just here with a friend. She was with him, and the thought of it, the betrayal, made my blood boil. I knew this moment would come eventually. The signs had been there for months, but I kept brushing them aside, convincing myself that we could work through whatever was going on. That's what marriage was, right? You stuck together even when things got tough. But there's a difference between tough times and outright betrayal. As the first act of the play came to an end and the lights flickered back on for intermission, I stood up. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight as I walked down the aisle toward them. She didn't see me at first, too engrossed in her conversation with him. But as I reached their row and cleared my throat, her head whipped around, eyes wide in shock. "Ethan?" she stammered, her voice barely audible, her face drained of color, and she instinctively pulled her hand away from him. I looked at her for a moment, my eyes flicking between her and the man sitting beside her. He looked confused, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over them. I pulled out the ticket I'd bought, waved it in front of her, and said, "Excuse me, but this is my seat." Her face twisted in horror, and the man, her friend I assumed, looked up at me, finally piecing together what was happening. "Wait, who are you?" he asked, his voice shaky. I turned to him, my voice calm but cold. "I'm her husband." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw true fear flash across Emily's face. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She was caught and she knew it. "Ethan, I can explain," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think." I laughed, though there was nothing funny about this. "It's exactly what I think, Emily." The man beside her, Jason, as I'd later learn, shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of what to do. He wasn't important. This wasn't about him. It was about her. About the lies she had been feeding me for months. The trust she had shattered with every secret text, every late night, every fake excuse. I took a step back, the anger in my chest growing hotter. "I've seen enough," I said quietly, my voice steady. "Enjoy the rest of the show." Without waiting for her to respond, I turned and walked out of the theater. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning inside me. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, and the only thing I knew for sure was that everything had changed. The cold night air hit me as soon as I stepped out of the theater, but it didn't help. My chest felt tight, like I was struggling to breathe, and my hands shook with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had seen enough. Enough to confirm what I had already known deep down but didn't want to admit to myself. I made my way through the parking lot, my mind racing. How had we even gotten here? When had everything between us gone so wrong? As I slid into the driver's seat, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. The lies, the betrayal, it was suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel and just sat there for a moment, staring out through the windshield at nothing in particular. My mind replayed everything I'd just seen. Emily's face, that flash of horror when she realized I had caught her. The fear in her eyes when she looked at me. She hadn't expected me to be there. She thought she had gotten away with it. I had trusted her. More than that, I had loved her. I had given everything to this marriage, and she had thrown it all away for some guy in a dark theater. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to keep the anger from exploding out of me. The engine roared to life, and I pulled out of the parking lot, the tires screeching as I sped away from the theater. The roads were mostly empty at this time of night, the city lights blurring as I drove through the streets with no real destination in mind. I didn't want to go home, but I couldn't stay out here in the cold, either. My mind was racing, but I couldn't focus on any one thought long enough to make sense of it. I glanced at my phone, which had been buzzing in the passenger seat since I left the theater. I didn't need to look to know it was Emily. She was probably texting me, calling, desperately trying to explain her way out of this mess. But I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. Not yet. Every time I thought of her sitting there with Jason, so comfortable, so close, my blood boiled. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But most of all, I wanted answers. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she lied to me, telling me she was with friends or at work, when in reality she was with him? My phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced down at it, and for a second, I considered picking it up. But I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear whatever half-baked excuse she was going to throw at me. The truth was too fresh, too raw, and I wasn't in any shape to deal with it. I kept driving, the city blurring past me as I tried to figure out what to do next. Was this it? Was this the end of our marriage? I had never thought about divorce before, but now it seemed like the only option. How could I ever trust her again? How could I ever look at her and not see the lies, the betrayal? Part of me wanted to turn the car around, to go back to the house and confront her properly, to demand answers, to hear her try and explain her way out of this. But I knew that would only lead to more pain, more anger. I wasn't ready for that. I needed time to think, to process everything that had just happened. I pulled into an empty parking lot by the beach, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore barely audible through the closed windows. I turned off the engine and sat there in the silence, staring out at the dark horizon. My mind was a mess, but at least here, in the stillness, I could breathe. I thought about everything we had been through, the good times, the bad times, the years we had spent building a life together. And now it all felt meaningless. Every memory, every moment we had shared, it was all tainted by what she had done. I closed my eyes, resting my head against the seat, and let out a long, shaky breath. The anger was still there, burning in my chest, but underneath it, there was something else. A hollow ache, a deep sadness that I hadn't been prepared for. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the loss of everything I thought we had. I had built my life around her, around us. And now, in the span of a single night, it felt like it was all falling apart. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a moment before picking it up. I didn't want to read her messages, but I couldn't avoid it forever. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart pounding as I unlocked it. Sure enough, there were half a dozen texts from Emily, all frantic, all pleading. "Ethan, please, it's not what you think. I'm so sorry. Just come home and we can talk. Please don't leave like this. I love you." The last message hit me the hardest. I love you. How could she say that after what she had done? How could she claim to love me while sneaking around with another man? The words felt like a knife in my chest, twisting deeper with every second. I tossed the phone back onto the passenger seat, disgusted. There was no point in reading any more of her lies. I knew the truth now, and no amount of pleading or apologizing could change that. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring out at the dark, empty ocean. The waves crashed relentlessly against the shore, uncaring, unstoppable, just like the truth of what had happened between us. No matter how much I wished I could go back, fix things, or erase what I had seen, I couldn't. The damage was done. Eventually, I started the car again, the engine rumbling to life. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here. The night was still young, and there were decisions to be made. But for now, I just needed to keep moving, to keep driving until I figured out what to do next. As I pulled out of the parking lot and back onto the road, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The drive back to the house felt longer than it should have. Every turn, every familiar street, brought me closer to the confrontation I knew I couldn't avoid. My mind was racing, caught between the need for answers and the fear of hearing more lies. I had no idea what I would say, but I knew this had to happen. I couldn't just leave things hanging in the air, unanswered. The house came into view, the lights still on, as if everything inside was perfectly normal. As if Emily was waiting for me to come home, like it was just any other night. But nothing about this night was normal anymore. I pulled into the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door, trying to collect myself. My heart was pounding, and the weight of what I was about to face felt heavier than I could handle. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to face her. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the house, my feet feeling like they were moving through quicksand. When I opened the door, I was immediately greeted by the sight of Emily sitting on the couch, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me, and for a split second, I could see the fear in her eyes, the guilt, the desperation. "Ethan," she said, her voice small, fragile, like she was afraid to say my name. "Please, let's talk." I closed the door behind me, the sound of it clicking shut louder than I expected. The air between us was thick with tension, heavy with all the unspoken words, the lies, the betrayal. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at her. I didn't trust myself to speak. Not yet. She stood up from the couch, taking a hesitant step toward me, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice low, controlled, but barely. The anger was bubbling under the surface, threatening to spill over at any moment. I wasn't going to let her off that easily. Not this time. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears again. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean for it to get this far." I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. "That's the thing, Emily. It did get this far. And now here we are." She stepped closer, reaching out as if she thought touching me would make everything better. But I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. I couldn't let her manipulate me with her tears, with the softness in her voice. "Not anymore. Tell me the truth," I said, my voice cold. "How long has this been going on?" She blinked, taken aback by the question, her lips parting as if she was about to lie again. But something in my expression must have stopped her, because she sighed, her shoulders sagging as she gave up the fight. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months," I repeated, the words like acid on my tongue. "So all this time you've been lying to me. Every time I asked you how your day was, where you were going, who you were with, you've been lying." She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I know I messed up. I never meant for it to go this far. It happened." I scoffed, the anger rising in my chest like a wave. "It just happened? You don't accidentally sneak around with someone for months. Emily, that's not something that just happens." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, her whole body shaking. "I was lonely, Ethan. You were always working, always distant. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. And Jason, he was there for me when I needed someone. Don't put this on me." I snapped, my voice louder now, sharper. "Don't you dare try to make this my fault. I was working to keep our life together, to make sure we had everything we needed. And you were off with him." She shook her head violently, her words coming out between sobs. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I swear. I never wanted to hurt you. Please, Ethan. I still love you. I laughed bitterly, unable to stop myself. Love? You call this love? Lying to me, sneaking around with someone else? That's not love, Emily. That's betrayal. She looked at me, her eyes wide, desperate. Please, we can fix this. We can go to therapy, we can talk about it. I'll cut off all contact with him. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me. Her words felt like a punch to the gut, but not in the way she intended. They didn't stir any feelings of forgiveness or sympathy. Instead, they filled me with a cold, bitter resolve. There was no fixing this. There was no going back. I stared at her for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say. But in the end, only one word came out. Divorce. The word hit her like a slap. She flinched, her eyes widening in shock, her sobs stopping abruptly. No, Ethan, no. Please don't say that. We can fix this. I know we can. I'll change, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. There's nothing left to fix, Emily. It's over. She collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with silent sobs as she buried her face in her hands. I watched her for a moment, the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, and felt nothing. The anger, the hurt. It was still there, but it was distant now, like a dull ache that I had grown numb to. I turned and walked toward the door, my steps slow but steady. As I reached for the doorknob, I paused, glancing back at her one last time. I'll have the papers drawn up, I said quietly. We'll figure out the details later. With that, I opened the door and stepped outside. The cool night air hit me again, but this time it felt different. Lighter, like I could finally breathe. As I walked to my car, I didn't look back. The drive away from our house, now just a building full of broken memories, felt strangely quiet. The world outside seemed unchanged, as if nothing had happened, even though my entire life had just been turned upside down. My chest felt tight, the weight of the decision I'd made still settling in. Divorce. The word echoed in my mind, hard and cold, yet it also felt like a strange kind of relief. There was no going back now. I knew that. I wasn't the type of guy to make empty threats, and Emily knew that too. She probably didn't believe it at first, probably thought I was just angry and blowing off steam. But this was real. I had seen enough, heard enough. There was no fixing what was broken. I pulled into a nearby gas station, parking at the far end of the lot. I needed a moment to clear my head, to breathe. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, staring out at the flickering neon lights of the convenience store. My mind was racing, replaying everything over and over again. Emily's pleading, her excuses, her tears. It all felt so rehearsed now, like she had practiced what she'd say if she ever got caught. Maybe she had. Maybe she had known for a long time that this moment would come, but she had hoped I'd never be brave enough to face it. She had underestimated me. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I couldn't look at her and pretend we still had something worth saving. It wasn't just the fact that she had cheated. It was the lies, the disrespect, the way she had so easily thrown away everything we'd built together. And now, as much as it hurt to admit, I realized that the woman I thought I loved was someone I didn't even recognize anymore. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a moment before unlocking it. More messages from Emily. Her texts were pouring in, each one more desperate than the last. Ethan, please don't do this. We can fix it. I love you. I'll do whatever it takes. Just come home. Let's talk about this. Each word felt like a slap in the face, and I could feel the anger rising in my chest again. How could she still say she loved me? How could she beg me to come home after everything she had done? She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry for getting caught. There was a difference, and I wasn't stupid enough to fall for her empty apologies. I tossed the phone back onto the passenger seat, my fingers trembling. I wasn't going to answer her. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. She had had her chance to come clean, to tell me the truth, but instead, she had chosen to lie over and over again. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the seat, as I tried to breathe through the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, hurt, betrayal, they were all fighting for space in my mind, making it impossible to think clearly. How did we get here? How had everything gone so wrong? I thought back to when we first got married. How happy we were. How sure I was that we would be together forever. We had dreams, plans, and I believed in us. I believed in her. But somewhere along the way, that belief had been shattered. And now there was nothing left but broken pieces. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Emily. It was Mark. I hadn't spoken to him in a while, not since the suspicions about Emily first started creeping into my mind. He had always been blunt with me, never sugarcoating the truth, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear his take on this. But I couldn't ignore him forever. I picked up the phone, swiping to answer. "Hey, Ethan, man. What the hell is going on? I've been trying to get a hold of you for hours." Mark's voice crackled through the speaker. Concern laced through every word. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "It's over, Mark. I caught her." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. "Caught her? What do you mean?" "She's been cheating on me. With some guy named Jason. I caught them together tonight at the theater." Mark let out a low whistle. "Shit, man. I'm sorry. I knew something was off, but I didn't think—" He trailed off, clearly unsure of what to say. "Yeah," I muttered, staring out at the dark parking lot. "Neither did I. But it's over now. I told her I'm filing for divorce." "Good," Mark said, his voice firmer now. "She doesn't deserve you, Ethan. You've been too good to her for too long. She screwed up, and she's gonna have to live with that. You don't owe her anything." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I know. It hurts, you know? I thought we were happy. I thought we had something real." "You did," Mark said, his tone softening. "But she made her choice. You can't fix this, and you shouldn't have to." I leaned back in my seat, letting his words sink in. Mark was right. Emily had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I had already decided to leave her, but hearing it from someone else, from someone who cared about me, made it feel more real, more final. "Thanks, man," I said, my voice quieter now. "I appreciate it." "Any time," Mark replied. "You want to crash at my place tonight? You shouldn't be alone right now." I thought about it for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, that sounds good. I'll be there in a bit." "Take your time," he said. "I'll be here." I hung up and stared at the phone for a moment, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt all night. I wasn't alone in this. I had people who cared about me, who would help me through this mess. And maybe, just maybe, I would come out the other side stronger for it. I started the car and pulled out of the gas station, the dark streets stretching out in front of me as I headed toward Mark's place. The night was still young, but the weight of everything that had happened was starting to settle in. I knew this was just the beginning of the end. There were still papers to file, details to sort out, and the emotional wreckage to deal with. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. Emily didn't have that power over me anymore. Her lies, her betrayal, they were hers to live with now. And as for me, I was moving forward, one step at a time. The drive to Mark's place was quiet, the roads practically empty at this late hour. I kept the windows down, letting the cool night air whip through the car as if it could somehow clear my head of the mess I was in. I felt numb, not just physically, but emotionally too, like the weight of everything that had happened hadn't fully settled yet. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe I was still in shock, floating in the limbo between anger and acceptance. When I finally pulled into Mark's driveway, his front porch light was on, casting a soft glow on the pavement. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Part of me didn't want to get out, didn't want to face the reality of the situation. I knew once I stepped out of this car, once I walked into Mark's house, it would all become real. There would be no more pretending that this was just a bad dream. But I couldn't sit here forever. I grabbed my phone and keys, stepping out of the car and making my way up to the front door. Before I even knocked, Mark opened it, his face a mix of concern and sympathy. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let me in. And that's why he was my best friend. He knew when words weren't necessary. I walked into the familiar living room, dropping my keys and phone onto the coffee table as I collapsed onto the couch. Mark followed me in, sitting down across from me in the armchair, nursing a beer. "Rough night, huh?" he finally asked, taking a sip. I let out a bitter laugh. You could say that. He didn't push for details, didn't ask me to recount everything that had gone down at the theater or the fight at the house. He just sat there, waiting, letting me come to terms with it all in my own time. That was Mark, always knowing when to give me space. After a long silence, I finally spoke, the words coming out slowly. "It's weird. You'd think I'd be angry, or heartbroken, or something. But I'm not. I just feel empty." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's normal. You've been holding it together for so long, trying to make sense of everything. Now that you've confronted it, your brain doesn't know what to do next." I leaned back against the couch, staring up at the ceiling. I don't know what to do next. I feel like my whole life just blew up, and now I'm standing in the rubble, trying to figure out what's left. He took another sip of his beer, leaning forward. "You're not standing in rubble, man. You're standing at a crossroads. You've got a choice now. You can rebuild or you can stand there looking at the mess. But I'll tell you this, you're better off without her. I've known you for years, Ethan. You deserve better than what she gave you." I sighed, rubbing my eyes. It just feels like such a waste, you know? All those years, all the things we built together. It's just gone. "It's not gone," Mark said, shaking his head. "The memories are still there, the lessons, the growth. Yeah, the marriage is over, but that doesn't mean everything you went through was for nothing. It just means it's time to take those lessons and build something better." I nodded, though his words didn't quite sink in the way they should have. I understood what he was saying, but I wasn't sure I was ready to move forward just yet. It was still too fresh, too raw. "So what now?" Mark asked, breaking the silence. "You gonna get the divorce started?" I swallowed hard, the word divorce still feeling strange on my tongue. "Yeah, I called my lawyer earlier. I told him to start drawing up the papers." Mark nodded approvingly. "Good. That's a solid step. The sooner you get that part over with, the sooner you can focus on what's next." "What is next?" I asked, the frustration creeping into my voice. I don't even know where to start. Everything I thought my future was going to be, it's gone. I'm 35, Mark. I thought I'd be settled by now. A wife, maybe kids on the way. Now, I'm back at square one. "You're not at square one," Mark said firmly. "You've got your career, you've got friends, and most importantly, you've got yourself. The marriage didn't define you, Ethan. It was just a part of your life. A part that's over. Sure, but not the end." I nodded again, though it still felt like a hollow agreement. I wasn't ready to see the bright side just yet. The reality of what had happened, of everything I had lost, was still sinking in. I knew Mark was right, but I needed time. Time to process, time to grieve, time to figure out who I was now without Emily. We sat in silence for a while, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Eventually, Mark stood up and tossed me a spare blanket. "You know where the guest room is. Get some sleep. You've had a hell of a night." I caught the blanket, nodding gratefully. "Thanks, man." Mark gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder before heading to his room, leaving me alone in the living room. I sat there for a while longer, staring at nothing in particular, my mind too tired to keep racing. Eventually, I dragged myself to the guest room, collapsing onto the bed with the blanket wrapped around me. As I lay there in the dark, my mind started to slow down. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, they were all still there, but they were quieter now, less overwhelming. I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. I wasn't sure what the future held, but at least now it was mine to shape. The thought brought me a small sense of comfort as I finally drifted off to sleep. The first few days after I filed for divorce were a blur. Time moved slowly, like I was trapped in a fog, drifting from one moment to the next without really engaging with any of it. I went through the motions. Work, errands, conversations with friends, but everything felt distant, like I was watching my life from behind a thick glass wall. Emily continued to text me, each message a mix of apologies and desperation. I didn't reply. I couldn't bring myself to. What was the point? The damage had been done, and no amount of groveling or promises would change that. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them just like I had to live with mine. Mark checked in on me regularly, making sure I was eating, sleeping, functioning. He was good at that, being there without being overbearing. He didn't push me to talk about how I felt unless I wanted to, and for that I was grateful. I wasn't ready to dive deep into my emotions, wasn't ready to face the full weight of the pain yet. I needed time. The days blurred into weeks, and slowly, I started to feel more like myself again. The initial shock and anger had faded into a dull ache, a constant reminder of what had happened, but not an all-consuming force anymore. I was healing slowly but surely, though it was a process I had to take one step at a time. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in a cafe downtown, sipping on a coffee and staring out the window at the bustling street. It was a place I used to come to with Emily, back when things were good. I hadn't been here since everything fell apart, but today, I felt like I needed to reclaim it for myself. I watched people pass by, couples holding hands, friends laughing together, strangers hurrying to wherever they needed to be. Life moved on, even when it felt like mine had come to a screeching halt. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the world didn't stop for your pain, that time kept marching forward no matter how badly you wanted it to pause. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed on the table. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. It was a message from my lawyer, letting me know that the divorce papers had been sent to Emily. The final step was in motion. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was it. The end of everything we had built together. The official end of a marriage that had once meant everything to me. And now it was nothing more than a stack of legal documents and signatures. I put the phone down, staring at the coffee cup in front of me. I should have felt something more, but all I felt was tired. Tired of the drama. Tired of the heartbreak. Tired of the constant weight pressing down on my chest. I just wanted to move on. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and I looked up to see Mark walking in. He spotted me and grinned, making his way over to my table. Without saying a word, he grabbed a chair and sat down across from me, his usual beer in hand. "How's it going?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he took a sip. I shrugged, swirling the coffee around in the cup. "It's going. Got the update from the lawyer. Emily's got the papers now." Mark nodded, his expression unreadable. "How do you feel about that?" I paused, trying to search for the right answer. "I don't know. Relieved, I guess. Sad too, but mostly just ready to move on." "That's good," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're doing the right thing, man. It's tough, but you're getting through it." I appreciated his words, even though they didn't quite sink in. The truth was, I wasn't sure what moving on looked like yet. I hadn't thought much beyond the divorce, beyond the immediate aftermath of everything. What did life look like without Emily? Without the life we had built together? "I guess," I muttered, taking a sip of coffee. "It's just weird. I thought we'd be together forever, you know? I had it all planned out in my head, house, kids, everything. And now I'm just here, alone." Mark watched me for a moment, his expression softening. "You're not alone. I mean, yeah, things didn't work out with Emily, but that doesn't mean you're alone. You've got me, you've got other friends, and you've got yourself. You're stronger than you think." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "I don't feel strong." "Maybe not right now," Mark said, leaning forward. "But you will. You'll get through this, and you'll come out the other side better for it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that I would come out of this stronger, better. But right now, it felt like I was just treading water, trying to keep my head above the surface. The conversation drifted into lighter topics, work, sports, the usual banter that Mark and I were good at. It was a welcome distraction, a reminder that life didn't have to be so heavy all the time. By the time we finished our drinks and said our goodbyes, I felt a little lighter. Not much, but enough to keep going. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but think about what Mark had said, that I wasn't alone, that I had people in my corner. It was true. I had friends, people who cared about me, and for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe I needed to start caring about myself again too. The divorce was just the beginning of a new chapter. It wasn't the end of my story. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I felt like I was ready to face it. One step at a time. The days after I signed the divorce papers were surreal. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, like I was watching my life unfold from the outside. But despite the emotional exhaustion that had become my constant companion, I knew I had to start rebuilding. I couldn't stay stuck in the past, mourning what was gone. I had to look forward, even if I wasn't sure what the future would hold. I threw myself into work, trying to lose myself in the routine. It helped, at least for a little while. My office became a sanctuary, a place where I could focus on numbers and projects instead of the hollow ache in my chest. The divorce process had been swift, the split of assets clean, and before I knew it, Emily and I were officially no longer husband and wife. I hadn't heard from her since the papers were finalized, and that was fine by me. There was nothing left to say. The silence between us, once filled with lies and tension, now felt like closure. It was strange, realizing that someone who had been such a huge part of my life was now a stranger. But it was also freeing. One night, after a long day at work, I sat in my empty apartment, staring at the pile of boxes I still hadn't unpacked. Moving out of the house had been harder than I expected. It wasn't just about leaving the physical space. It was about letting go of everything that house represented. The dreams we had built there, the life we had planned, it was all gone now. But sitting in that new apartment, I realized that I had the chance to start fresh, to make this space my own. I stood up, deciding to tackle one of the boxes. Inside were old photos, keepsakes from my time with Emily. Our wedding pictures, vacations we had taken together, moments that had once felt so special. I stared at them for a long time, my heart heavy. It was tempting to hold on to those memories, to cling to the past. But I knew better. One by one, I placed the photos into a box labeled storage, sealing it shut and pushing it into the corner. I wasn't ready to throw them away yet, but I also wasn't ready to keep them out in the open. They belonged to a different part of my life, a chapter that was now closed. Once the photos were packed away, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if I had taken one more step toward letting go. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The following weekend, Mark invited me to a barbecue at his place. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure if I was ready to be around people, to socialize as if everything was fine. But Mark had been a constant support throughout all of this, and I knew he wouldn't pressure me to put on a brave face. When I arrived, I was greeted with the familiar smell of grilled meat and the sound of laughter. Mark was at the grill, flipping burgers with a beer in hand, and when he saw me, he waved me over. "Glad you could make it," he said with a grin. "It's about time you got out of that cave you've been hiding in." I chuckled, grabbing a beer from the cooler. "Yeah, I figured it was time." Mark introduced me to a few of his friends, some of whom I had met before, others who were new. I felt out of place at first, unsure of how to navigate casual conversations when my mind was still weighed down by everything that had happened. But as the evening wore on, I found myself relaxing. For the first time in months, I was laughing, joking around with the guys, and not thinking about Emily. At one point, Mark pulled me aside, handing me another beer. "You seem like you're doing better," he said, watching me closely. I nodded, taking a sip. "Yeah, I think I am. It's still hard, but I'm starting to feel like myself again." "That's good," Mark said, clapping me on the shoulder. "It's all about taking small steps. You'll get there. Just don't rush it." We stood there for a moment, watching the sunset over the backyard, the sky turning shades of pink and orange. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I would be okay after all. As the barbecue wound down, I found myself in a quiet conversation with one of Mark's friends, Sarah. She was easy to talk to, with a calm, friendly demeanor that put me at ease. We talked about everything and nothing: work, hobbies, life in general. She didn't ask about Emily, didn't pry into my personal life, and for that I was grateful. It felt good to have a normal conversation without the weight of my past hanging over it. By the time I left Mark's house that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The barbecue hadn't been some grand revelation, but it had reminded me that life moved on. There were new people to meet, new experiences to have. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to start moving forward. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. For the first time, I didn't feel weighed down by the past. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark, thanking him for inviting me over. Then, on a whim, I texted Sarah, just a simple message to say it was nice talking to her. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately, and soon we were making plans to grab coffee later in the week. It wasn't a date. At least I didn't think of it that way, but it felt like a step forward. A small one, but a step nonetheless. As I got ready for the day, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see the man who had been broken by betrayal. I saw someone who was rebuilding piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and I knew I still had a long way to go. But I was getting there. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The weeks that followed felt like a slow but steady return to myself. I wasn't fully healed, not by a long shot, but the pieces of my life were beginning to come together in a way that felt manageable. I'd stopped waking up with that heavy weight of dread in my chest, and the fog that had clouded my mind since the night at the theater had begun to lift. Coffee with Sarah turned out to be a pleasant escape. It wasn't a date. Not really. But it felt good to sit across from someone and have a conversation that wasn't tinged with the sadness of my past. Sarah had an easy laugh and a way of making things feel light, even when life was anything but. We talked about work, about our favorite coffee spots around the city, and about nothing in particular. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company. I found myself looking forward to seeing her again. Mark, always the observant friend, picked up on it the next time we hung out. "So, you and Sarah, huh?" he asked with a smirk, clearly pleased with himself for setting things in motion. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "We've just been hanging out. It's nothing serious." "Doesn't have to be serious," Mark said, raising an eyebrow. "But it's good to see you getting out there again. You deserve to be happy, man." I wanted to argue, to say that I wasn't ready for anything yet, but the truth was, part of me was ready. I wasn't looking to jump into a relationship, but it felt good to connect with someone. It reminded me that there was more to life than the wreckage of my marriage. There were new people to meet, new experiences to have, and I wasn't trapped in that old chapter anymore. The divorce papers came back finalized not long after. When I opened the envelope, I sat there for a moment, staring at the official seal and my name next to Emily's. It was surreal. Everything we had once been was now reduced to a few sheets of paper and legal terms. I felt an unexpected pang of sadness, but it was different this time. It wasn't the sharp, unbearable pain I'd felt in the beginning. It was a softer, quieter acceptance. It was over. I signed the papers, sent them back, and with that, my marriage was officially done. I didn't reach out to Emily. There was no need. We had both moved on in our own ways. She was a chapter of my life, a part of my past, but I no longer felt the need to hold on to her or the life we had once shared. I could finally let go. In the days that followed, I started making small changes. I unpacked the last of the boxes in my apartment, decorating the space to feel more like home. I joined a gym, something I had put off for far too long, and began running in the mornings, enjoying the clarity that came with pushing myself physically. Little by little, I felt the pieces of me that had been shattered coming back together. And then there was Sarah. We kept meeting up for coffee, or sometimes drinks after work. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or anything dramatic. It was slow, steady, and uncomplicated. She was patient with me, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, and I appreciated that more than she probably knew. I wasn't sure where things were going between us, but I was okay with that. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to rush into the future. I was content with where I was. One evening, we were sitting in a quiet little bar, sharing a drink and laughing about something trivial, when she looked at me with a kind of quiet curiosity. "You seem different lately," she said, her eyes searching mine. "Different how?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, genuinely curious. "I don't know," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Lighter, happier, maybe, like you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders anymore." I thought about her words for a moment and realized she was right. I did feel lighter. The burden of the past had started to lift, and I was beginning to feel like myself again. Maybe even a better version of myself, one who had learned from the pain, who had grown from the experience. "Yeah," I said slowly, nodding. "I think I am happier." She smiled, and we clinked our glasses together. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. The rest of the evening was easy, filled with conversation and laughter. And as we walked out of the bar and into the cool night air, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't completely healed, but I was on my way. Life was moving forward, and I was moving with it. As I drove home that night, I thought about everything that had happened in the last few months. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak. It had all been overwhelming, like a tidal wave crashing over me, pulling me under. But somehow I had made it through. I had survived the storm, and now, as I looked ahead, I saw the calm after the chaos. I pulled into my driveway, the quiet of the neighborhood surrounding me as I stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, the stars shining bright above, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt content. I knew there would still be hard days ahead. Healing wasn't a straight line, and there would be moments when the past tried to creep back in. But now I had something I hadn't had before: hope. Hope for the future, hope for what was to come, and most importantly, hope in myself. As I closed the door behind me and stepped into my apartment, I realized that this was my new beginning. Not the one I had planned, but one that I had earned through struggle, through heartbreak, and ultimately, through growth. I wasn't the same person I had been before the divorce. I was stronger, more resilient, and ready to face whatever life had in store for me next. And that, I realized with a smile, was enough.